Okay. You all were just like, okay, it's time for David to come up to the stage. Because there was chatting and then there wasn't. It's like, oh, I better get up there. People are ready. Day 3. Good? Yeah. Good. Are we ready for tomorrow night? Yeah. Oh, that was are we ready for tomorrow night? Yeah. Woo, that's the spirit. Okay, I noticed a very robust sign-up amountage. Is that a word? For the reading tomorrow night. So good job. You all are going to really, really be glad that you did. So just want to validate that choice. Hi, I'm David Simpson still. I haven't changed my name. I'm still the program director here at the Work Center for the time being anyway. Hopefully don't fire me or anything like that. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm glad to see all of you. Our favorite parts of the week are these faculty events, so we're glad you're here. Tonight we have a wonderful lineup. We have master printmaker Fred Liang. And very pleased to also welcome Brenda Shaughnessy to this. Brenda will do a reading and Fred will give a talk and have some slides about his work. He's checking his Instagram right now. Nothing wrong with that, no judging. And then we'll do a Q&A with the audience afterwards. So the stuff that you've heard several times, if this is not your first time here this week or this summer, Brenda will be signing books at the back of the room after the event, and her books will be for sale. Also for sale, books by other faculty members here this week. This is when you can actually check your Instagram if you've been here every night this week. Pay no attention to me. Otherwise, happy to just keep going. And the bookstore, the bookstore is in between the two halves of the gallery next door, where we have lots of wonderful books by faculty, fellows, and other people with associations with the Work Center. Check out the gallery if you haven't done so already, and take a look at the summer exhibition that we call Edge Condition. It's curated by former Falk Fellow Matt Bollinger, and features work by about 20 or so former fellows. It's a beautiful show this summer. Be sure to check it out. As always, I would like to give a big shout out to East End Books for managing our bookstore. And also to the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod 5 Foundation for so generously supporting our summer public programming. Big hand to them. Make it all possible. The restrooms are still down the hall on the left-hand side, and the drinking fountain is across from it. We have assisted listening devices if that would make your experience better this evening. If you need that, please check in with Fatima and Hannah. They will connect you with one of those things. Are the cushions all gone? Come on in. Yep. They're all gone, right? There's a couple. So if there's a couple of cushions left, so if your buns are really wanting, there's one. We can have like a thumb thing for it. Whoever, if there's more than one person, like a thumb wrestling. Yeah, I wouldn't win probably. Okay, enough of that. Finally, please turn your cell phones to silent so that we can give our full attention to our presenters. And now to kick things off, I'd like to invite one of Brenda's students to the stage to introduce Brenda. Would you please join me in welcoming Laura McDermott.
Good evening, art friends and lovers of the spoken word. It is my pleasure to introduce our featured poet tonight, Brenda Shaughnessy. Brenda Shaughnessy is a poet whose work crackles with linguistic energy and emotional depth. Her 7 poetry collections include the recent Tanya in the Octopus Museum, showcase her ability to blend playful wordplay and profound insight into human experience. The poet, Sharon Olds, describes Brenda's poems as being pure fire in the hands, visceral, tactile, dazzling in their verbal alchemy. She's the real thing. Born in Okinawa and raised in Southern California, Shaughnessy's multicultural background infuses her poetry with a unique perspective. Her work often explores themes of identity, motherhood, and the complexities of human relationships, all rendered with a keen eye for detail and a masterful command of language. The poet David Kirby said in his 2008 article written about Brenda that, and I quote, As I read Shaughnessy's poems, I can't help hearing not only her poetic ancestors, about Abbott and Costello as well, but the film bumblers being chased by Frankenstein, but the double talkers who's on first routine is often imitated, never duplicated. People are funny, words are funnier. And poems, when they're at their smartest, are best made, are funniest of all. As a professor of English and creative writing at Rutgers University, Newark, Shaughnessy is known for her dedication to nurturing new poetic voices. Her teaching philosophy emphasizes the importance of risk-taking and emotional honesty in poetry, encouraging her students to push the boundaries of their craft. It's been such a privilege to sit and workshop with Brenda this week because I am not only becoming a better skilled poet, but I am also becoming a better teacher of the craft. I am watching her pedagogical style through the attention she gives to each poet's work, her desire to understand the entire poetic body of the poet is constructing, and the limitless attention she gives to the needs of the poem at hand. Brenda is truly a selfless giver that enables others to grow in their art. Shaughnessy's contributions to poetry have been widely recognized. She's received numerous accolades, including the Literature Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship. Her work has appeared in prestigious publications such as The New Yorker, Paris Review, and the New York Times Book Review. Currently, Shaughnessy is expanding her artistic horizons as the author of an opera entitled Sensorium X, set to premiere next year at the Common Sense Festival in Omaha, Nebraska. This project demonstrates her ongoing commitment to exploring new forms of artistic expression. Brenda Shaughnessy's poetry is a testament of the power of language to illuminate the human condition. Her work invites us to see the world anew, to find beauty in the unexpected, and to confront the complexities of our lives with courage and grace. To quote a line from Brenda Shaughnessy's book, The Octopus Museum, "A gift is always an exchange of energy, like water boiling, like photosynthesis." And Brenda has been that gift of energy this week. So please join me in welcoming Brenda Shaughnessy.
Thank you. It's a gift to be here. Thanks for coming. Thank you to everyone, David and Sarah and Hannah and Fatima. I want to start with a poem by the brilliant Tina Chang from her stunning book, Hybrida. This is Tina Chang. I sometimes wake in the middle of the night and think there has been a theft of the mind. Along the way, someone has taken a jewelry box away from me. In it, there was my great desire wrapped in tissue paper, folded in felt encasing, and pulsating inside was the thing itself. My inclination was to think it was a garnet or amulet, but more likely it was a word I had forgotten long ago. Composed in shaky hand. A first word I wrote when I was a child, the first time I understood meaning. Word as breathing survivor. Known her for 30 years. She always surprises me. My last book, my recent book, is called Tanya. The cover is a sculpture by Clementine Keith Roach. She's British. And my first book, which was published in 1999, also features a cover by a visual artist, Dorothea Tanning. Who died in 2012 at the age of 101. So I'm going to start with a poem from neither of those books that I just mentioned. And I'm going to start with a poem called Identity and Community. This is a true story. I went to Hawaii, all the way to Hawaii, to go swim in the ocean, and then I was too afraid to go in. Has that ever happened to you, something like that, where you're like, huge effort, and then suddenly at the last minute you realize it's you that's the obstacle? Identity and community. There is no I in C. I don't want to be surrounded by people, or even one person, but I don't want to always be alone. The answer is to become my own pet. Hungry for plenty in a plentiful place. There is no true solitude, only. At Seaside, I have that familiar sense of being left out. Too far to glean the secret, how go in? What an inhuman surface the sea has, always open. I'm too afraid to go in, I give no yes. Full of shame, but refuse to litter ever, I pick myself up. Wind has power, sun has power. What is power's source? There's no privacy outside, we've invaded it. There's no life outside empire. All paradise is performance for people who pay. Perhaps I'm an invader and feel I haven't paid. What a waste to have lost everything in mind. Watching three mom-like women try to go in. I'm green, I want to join them, but they are not my women. I join them, apologizing. They splash away from me, they're their pod. People are alien. I'm an unknown story, erasing myself with seawater. There goes my honey and fog, my shoulders and legs. What could be queerer than this queer tug lust for what already is, who already am, but other of it? Happens? That kind of desire anymore? Oh, I am that queer thing, pulling and greener than the blue sea. I'm new with envy. Beauty washing over itself. No reflection, no claim, nothing to see. If there's anything bluer than the ocean, it's its greenness. It's turquoise blood mixing me. I was a woman alone in the sea. Don't tell anybody, I tell myself. Don't try to remember this. Don't document it. Remember, write down to not document it. Jouissance. Your phantoms hang neatly from skyhooks, ready to be veils, ready to disembody you. You have shelled yourself of this curved room, and the smell is of burnt door. Slack belly, hot, it is an abattoir, lacking its usual firmness. Your ordinary sweet kinesis, peevish in the crumble and whetstone of your body. And so you go. Every city has a place called the Roxy. Go. To keep from the quicksand of this unbearable curl, tender Leviathan in the last window, crimson facing west. How could you? You are Gundella. You are anyone's Maria. Electric to perishing, your more auxiliary lovers, like pralines or quaaludes, cannot touch you. No teasing or lockjaw, caustic, all of you, even shadow, must be bullseye. Your shaggy, skeptical quasar has died the way Andromeda dies, so very late at night. You are disenchanted. You are all rain collected in a butterfish sack, opaque and draining. The description of this you hold under like a genius in dark water. So that poem was from this first book, which was published in the last millennium. And it has the word Andromeda in it. Many years later, I would write a book that featured Andromeda in a central way. And I didn't even know I did that. I went back years later and I saw that poem and I was like, what? So Tani is a book about art and the creation of art and mentors and apprenticeship and learning. There's a big poem in there dedicated to my literature teacher from University of California, Santa Cruz, a Bronte and Wolf scholar named Helene Moglin. But I'm not going to read that either. Instead, I'm going to read a poem I wrote for MoMA. I want to read some pieces about art because I think that works here. I'm so moved by getting a chance to see people's art, and I think that literature and visual art do belong together. MoMA asked me to write a poem for one of their pieces of art, and I could pick anything I wanted. It was so strange. And so I was like, do you have Merritt Oppenheim's For Teacup? And they did, and no one else had chosen it. And so I got to write about that thing. Now, I'm sure everybody's seen it. I don't have a visual, but you know Merritt Oppenheim's object. This is my version of it. I'm not sure if this poem is speaking in the voice of the teacup. That would be really weird. I'm not sure if that's what's happening, but it might be happening. The Impossible Lesbian Love Object, or The Impossible Lesbian Love Objects, after Merritt Oppenheim's object. 1, it's just an object. It's not me. I am more than an object. We are not having tea. I am not 1, not 2. I'm a feminist 3. I am Dada, not Mama, never will be. When no one can use me, I am most free. 2, I am not like other objects unaware of themselves, those props subbing for desire. The corner of the room thinks the room is one-cornered. That cat sculpture staring as if with its eyes. I, too, am a mammal stolen from my original sense of thirst. Women know this disappearance from meaning. Like all lesbian triptychs, I've stumbled. Like all love objects, I am triangular, unstable. I'm a lonely trio, a single setting, vexed and passive, sexed and distracted. A hot drink, a pot on the fire, the muscles loosened, an inner stirring, a little spill. The coat on the floor, the fur coat on the floor, the curved fur floor atop another fur circle, to never catch a drop, and a concave face with convex back swirling nothing, none of it really happening. I was once and always only ever an idea, just a clever blip, a quip, a dare, converted by coin and concept, given body, shape, hair, and an immortal uselessness all art thinks it's born with that women can't get near. 3, I'm beloved for being art's best worst idea, famous for being impossible, that's why I'm obscene. Not because everybody wants to fuck the cup, not even the spoon can get it up. Full frontal frottage, sapphic saucer, a curving inside outness, hairy leather hole. Liquid skill is soaking, then getting sucked. Seeds luck is spilling, then being tilled. It turns out we are having tea. But it's also heavy with life cycles that even when you go light with art, to get a little air, the room's still a bit dark. And I'm repulsed, which attracts. In fact, the promise of warm fur is ancient, will outlast the ritual fire and water of tea for 3, not 2. You see, there's me and you and we. Pelts melt into a new body, not old. We're not thirsty, we're not cold. 4, I'm not just an object, my surfaces servicing, but I'm no more than myself. I end at my edges, finish my points, even if I bend your senses when I am this soft. The spoon is small, the cup generous, the saucer extra absorbent, past story, beyond end, like a certain kind of woman I have been with and been. This is for Urvashi Faid, October 8th, 1958 to May 14th, 2022. This poem is called Irv Predicts the Present, or Irv Predicts the President. She saw the present so clearly, she told Barack Obama, "You aren't paying enough attention to the right wing." And he answered so lightly, "Oh, I'm not paying enough attention to the right wing," that she knew we'd never get past it. So this next poem is hard to find. Yeah, I do have a system, but it's like fucked up. So this is a poem that wraps in a bunch of different kinds of artists. There are some name checks: Dorothea Tanning, Jessica Rankin, Georgina Pascugan, the the composer Paola Prestini. I think that's it. The artist, Jessica Rankin, loves poetry. I love artists who love poetry. Dorothea Tanning was another, because artists know what they create sounds well beyond the edge of the visual realm. They know poetry uses vision from a corner of the palette, a couple blobs of paint dipped into for highlights and shadow. Artists love edging and spilling over into fresh media, mesh nets spread to catch them. Who will tell the capacious, frank, and post-sexual Jessica Rankin that poetry thinks music contains the attributes the artist attributes to poetry? That poetry leans hard on music so constantly that music doesn't even notice the parasitic pressure and sponge anymore. Music's got better things to do, and it's not really in a hurry the way poetry and art sort of seem to be. Maybe the dancer, Georgina, will be asked to perform yet another task for another's art. Asked to give her body's limited editions of breath and blood, her lifetime supply. How relentless to embody another's creation. How necessary this vexed vesseling, voiceover-like. Not even music stands on its own without instruments, and instruments need players, players need bodies, bodies need choreography to move the music out of its resting place, unsettle the score. The score, yes. Paola wrote more than the staff can handle. So lush on the page, the old idea of opera on a plain four-corner stage grows mold. She knows who broke the music, those who chose to kill it young rather than have to learn to hear anew. I'm thinking the choreographer Lauren, who is young, who grew up in my hometown decades after I left, might have something to say about the institutions in which all our arts contained, meted out, cut, maimed. I'll get blowback for saying that. People who insist on controlling art will say this isn't art. Good, ignore it. Too late, I'm interrupted now, here. No, you're asking. In the middle of a poem why I'm dropping names? I'll name check if I please, but please, I'll not drop these names. I picked them from the artistry to graft onto poetry. It is, you know, a high art, and I am a poet, classically fancy. Just as Jessica, poetry's still up there, living light in a high rise, editing the edifice's artifice. Skystruck. This poem is only a net. Fish, ether, for the artists gathered here in the way of poets, cornered in a spiraling room in case they, in the way of poets, trip the edge and need a soft place to land. Here, pulsing cloud pillows with jackknife for the dancer, silk hagiography for the choreographer, true wave via childhood for Paola, dreamy azure drops and lucent streaks of aubergine, Dorothea's favorite word, for the artist Jessica Rankin, who loves poetry. Now, you notice, my students, I use the word azure here. Everybody has seemed to this week in our class. I'll finish with just a few, couple selections from the long poem, which is the title poem called Tanya. It's, I think, 50-something pages at the end of the book. And it's in these sort of, like, flowy, downward sort of stair steps. And the whole idea is that it's like following thought. But you, my friend, I made and lost. I did not write you. We'll never know the end of you. That's not how I write anyway, knowingly. I swear your hand is little, but you carry me. I'm liquid heavy. But you are also me. Before, during, later, over, the foil, the lover, the ham and cheese who will not eat herself. Veganly, you undo yourself in hopes that after a time you can sneak back in. I don't care if this is general, pointless, unaware what it is. Only you will read it and you know it's all true. No going back to fix us. We evaporated, and our air, like everyone else's. I've tried so hard to trick myself into realness, to escape the artificial ingredients cooked into me. So dissembling and uncremating and separating and reversing the processes is how oh, that can't be right. What a fool. I mistook a wish for a tool. Hammered my own crate shut, shipped off to stranger water than I imagined. That was no trick. That was just me, wanting to believe a realness I could believe in existed somewhere I didn't make or visit, that I could land home somewhere to call someone on a landline, call these lines mine. Didn't I find myself unbearable, mostly? And you annoyed me as much as amazed me, always interrupting. Sorry, but likely you were right to cut me off every time I began. I had written something ugly here, something mean I can't walk back. But now you want to know what I erased. I can tell you it was true and only about myself. There, now we're less interested, right? Yes, time can't erase it, but I can, still. It'll have to do. The ones I loved who died, why do I say I loved? Why died? Why not the ones I love who die? Since that's what I'm presenting here. I love them, they still die. I am there in that time when I love them. I am with them because I speak of it now. If their death is past, so should my love for them be, but I hold their death inside my living love. If this death is past tense, rigored, my love isn't. It's a hot, wet, stinging hole I came to fill with you instead. Wasted time piles up like plastic watches behind the internet full of fish. How can I make jokes at a time like this? Having wasted what little I had on a thought I never finished, a cake still goo inside, though it was already decorated to look like a graveyard in the sun, blinking hard, and seeing nothing but nobody singing behind trees. Sometimes all that matters is being able to finish a thought. Whereas before, the problem was others interrupting me, but now I just lose my way. I don't want to live so long someone has to increasingly take care of me, and so increasingly that it has to be an employee, or is that too terrible to say? I don't want it for me, but for others, okay? What is an independent life? What defines it? Why is it so important? Why do we fight for it, but everything's weighted against us eventually, for each of us, really, in the end? Will we die independent? Any of us not somebody's job? Somebody whose job it is to keep me plugged into a generator if the power goes out? That's not a metaphor. Or it is for life. That is, death is a metaphor for life. Death is like life, but less believable. I don't think I'm brainy because I love too much the feeling of my thoughts moving aside to let new ones in. And the mixing feels so good. I begin to crave it, look for it. Hard books, out there arguments, paintings, phrases I turn over for meaning underneath and accept the whole is in me. The absence, thick suction, where better ideas will sink into mine like a lush bed of all the flowers whose names I could learn. I am jealous of myself writing here as I'm dying, as I'm doing now. I know when I come here again, I will be reading this, not writing it, wishing I were. Writing isn't pleasant, not relaxing, doesn't feel exciting. The tip of a pen is the line of life lived truthfully and fully, and that line both led and followed that life. But writing is not illuminating like that, not profound. Usually it's ink motion, a liquid to remind you of flow. Where there's flow, what you know finds form, draws near to the surface so your pen can trace the features, expressions. Flow is sound blocking, interruption can't rise to it, face set to the clock of work. Try to turn my mind away from the lines and shapes of meaning, and the best you get is a hollow corner snapped off the edge, a crumpled slip of my attention. The whole won't be available for anything else but this ink. While it flows inside my pen, moved by that energy I must call flow. Another word for it is overflow. Brimming, an explosion, water, living life post-vessel. But nothing is wasted, nothing runs. I'll end with this one. Before I do, I just want to say thank you again. Parents of grown children tell me grown children leave, but you can't touch their rooms, and you can't leave. You have to stay there for when they come back. Like you're a paused video, but they forgot to watch you when they come back. Or they don't come back, so you're like the mom in The Leftovers doing chores for nobody. At least the dog appreciates you, at least she needs you for your general needs meeting skills. Don't you have a dog to play with somewhere, my child? Can't you get completely engrossed in a project all day? What about the science kits, those make-your-own fertilizer hair clips with rhinestones and chemical reactions of slime and purple smoke? Can you leave me alone now and promise to come sit by your old mom when I am old and you are able to run off and find your own chemistry projects and watch your own smoke dissipate? Never colorful again? in a cold apartment in the city without me. The kids, they say, become you, but they live, so that's a happy story. They live elsewhere. They were able to move. They found their own place. Sounds like they're real independent, self-sufficient, responsible, rich off your money, ungrateful, naturally averse to you anymore. We used to live in the city that kept us in grand digs and underwater, like Urashima Taro, the boy who visited the old sea turtle's royal palace. The boy went for a long weekend, returned home 200 years later, everyone dead. Will you return that way? The way is both a way and a question. Will you go the way going goes, or will you go the way goes? Ancient, unaware, so sure we spent time in the same denominations as everybody else, but we had to turn back to the palace, unkings we, duchesses of dust. For the city can't die without us. We used to dream of a little place in the city, a pied-à-terre, but that's the worst idea. We want so badly to live in the city, you get a place to not live in there? Really, you live elsewhere where you never wanted to live but do? Like wet-cut flowers spilling? I can't write an ending for posterity. Too much future, all sung out. Old love, no longer dead to me. You are completely mixed up with the rest of me ever. Do I refract everything I experience through everything I experience? Inhaling 1991 Tanya, exhaling present self? I know I'll never know. But I'm writing this toward that knowledge of endless unknowing. That is why writers are so weird, that and other reasons. We are neither creative nor interpretive artists, but both. And those two lives are hard to live at once. Believe me, I'm trying. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda Shaughnessy. Can we have a little bit more applause for Brenda, please? Thank you so much. So glad that circumstances brought you here this summer. Now we're going to hear from Fred Liang. And to introduce Fred, we're going to welcome one of his students to the stage. Please welcome XC.HuA to the stage, please.
It's okay.
XC.HuA.
It's really okay.
Okay.
But thank you. Good evening. I didn't know Fred when I volunteered to introduce him, but I'm glad I did, and it's been quite a full 3 days. Fred Liang received a BFA from the University of Manitoba and an MFA from Yale University. His honors include Massachusetts Cultural Council Arts Grants in painting, printmaking, and works on paper. Fred's work is in numerous public and private collections, including Fidelity, the Gund Collection, Addison Museum of American Art, and the Rose Museum at Brandeis University. Fred's most recent exhibitions include the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Addison Museum of American Art in Massachusetts, XC.HuA Gallery in Berlin, and Jerez de la Frontera Gallery at the University of Cadiz, Spain. He was the recipient of the 2020 Joan Michell Foundation grant and the Boston Foundation's Brother Thomas Fellowship in 2021. Fred is a professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Boston, Massachusetts, which, if you don't know, is the only publicly funded independent art school in the country. And he is chair of the Printmaking Department. I speak for my workshop classmates when I say that Fred is kind, patient, detail-focused, and an expert teacher. His depth of artistic knowledge, his intuitive feel for the various presses, his ear for the ink, and his incredible generosity of time are making our experience here at Falk creative and memorable. If his presentation tonight is at all lacking, it is our fault because we've demanded much of him this week, and he's been with us in the studio each afternoon. Thank you, Fred, and please join me in welcoming Fred Liang to the stage.
Thank you, Anne. That was very kind of you. And I want to thank David, Sarah, Hannah, and Fatima for having me back here. And although this has been almost a decade since I've been back here, I never take it granted in the way that, this is such an amazing institution, and they could invite almost anybody to come. And I'm so blessed to have amazing students to work with, and also to be with amazing artists and poets. And the last bit of it is that to go up here following the poets, it's probably the most frightening thing I know. So, but I'm always enjoying being here during the summer. And I have to say, everyone keep on asking me, why do you go there? I said, definitely not for the beaches. So, tonight I'm going to give a kind of a different kind of talk. Partly because I think most artists can't. We're so disorganized. We really can't talk about our work in 20 minutes. It's more like 2 hours or 3 hours, and after people fall asleep, you still keep on talking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a different kind of talk and talk a little bit about something else, and then have my art next to the things that I'm talking about. And hopefully you can see both, and maybe there's some connection, maybe there isn't. So here goes. The only way I know how to keep this under 20 minutes. So my name is Fred Liang, and I'm an artist who actually live and work in Boston, and I've been making, printmaking and painting for the past 30, 40 years. And in the recent years, I don't think I can define myself exclusively to what that is. So last week, I was in a panel, which kind of a 75th anniversary about revisiting this panel on the summer of '49, Forum 49, which involved Hans Hofmann, Asheville Gorky, Motherwell, and a few other notables. And they were talking about what is an artist, right? And the discussion was actually quite amazing. And I was very fortunate to be with, people like Helen Molesworth and Mara Schur and Leah Harrington, and we were. I'm happy to tell you that the question was very provocative, but I'm happy to tell you that we came up with no answers. So I thought that's not very satisfying. So, but more importantly, during the question period and answer period, somebody asked a question. I thought that was probably more interesting than the initial question of what is an artist. And the person in the audience, I think he asked based on our conversation, and it was based on hierarchy or presumed hierarchy of art. And he wants to know who is considered artist and who is not considered an artist, and how do you define that border, which I'm going to not answer tonight, but I will give you some of the thoughts that I have, because I sort of answered part of it, and I want to kind of reinforce it, because I thought my answer was a little too curt and too short, didn't have any context to it. I'm going to try to provide a little bit of a context to it. And meanwhile, one side of it would be other people's work, and the other side of it would be my work, okay? Or it's my work. So first of all, borders and boundary. Oh, actually, no, I should do this. I should do this, right? Can you guys see that? Yeah. Can we turn the lights off here? Yeah. So we know intuitively who is the artist, right? We can all agree to that. But when you define someone that's not something, it's a little bit harder. So very often when people ask me who I am or what do I do, I actually answer in a negative. I tell them what I'm not. And they look at me, they're like, huh, that's interesting. And first of all, I said, I'm not sculptor, not an installation artist, not a printmaker. You know, just go on like that. And then if you ask me about my heritage, I'm like, that gets even more tricky. So it is easier to say, you know, what the person is, but it's much harder to say what the person is not. And that was kind of a genesis of the initial question. So I'm going to go back and look at, you know, the things that I was thinking about in terms of, well, what makes someone an artist? And what makes something that brought us to a point we identify ourselves as artists, poets, writers, musicians, and whatever creative field that you're in. So on the right, you have a painting by Montaigne in the 14th century, which he tried to define the space of painting in terms of perspectives, right? The subject matter is a very common subject matter during that period of time because everyone painted religious themes, right? And in this particular painting, from our eye, it's a kind of an awkward painting. But at the time, it was quite a revolutionary painting because he's trying to define space, perception, and point of view. Whereas before it was presented as a kind of a theater-like following the Romans, you're looking across from the left to right as a stage and narrative, and the narrative position, right? And then Raphael shortly created this School of Athens painting, which is a fresco, which created one-point perspective, kind of nailed the perspective down. I mean, what can you do after this as an artist, right? Essentially, we're trying to get realistic space, light, form, and that's it. He nailed it. So let's just pack the bag, done. We're done. We don't need to say anything anymore, right? So I'm sure at every point of history, the artists, writers, poets, musicians say, well, we accomplished a lot. Let's take a break. So a little bit afterwards, someone named Da Vinci made this particular painting everybody loves, Mona Lisa, and everybody loved the painting and talk about the smile, right? Of course, it's a very enigmatic painting. However, I think for artists, we look at things that beyond the smile. I mean, yeah, it's a nice smile, but what Da Vinci created was a sense of depth of space without using single point perspective strategy. Essentially, it's a frontal painting. If you look at a frontal painting from previous to that, it looks very compressed. Here, he discovered that if you actually paint distant landscapes in a much more bluer, hazier, and fuzzier light, you get a perspective, right? And interestingly, that's what people have seen for eons. It's like calling sky blue. We actually have evidence on which point in human history that we actually first coined the term sky as blue. Until somebody says what it is, nobody knows what it is. So here, Da Vinci literally said, you know what, that's the way it looks. I'm going to paint it that way. Whereas before, this was more or less a convention. So once that's done, what else can you do, right? And you can see on the, at this particular painting by Caravaggio, which is called Entombment of Christ. Whereas painting has always been viewed as a window into another world, as a narrative device to tell a story about who we are or what we think about, right? In this particular painting, Caravaggio want to engage us not like the paintings that came before this, which is draw the viewer into the pictorial world. Here, what he does is that he wants to take the pictorial world and poke it into your world to give you a sense of reality and commitment. And here, what he did, literally, I don't know how many people have seen this painting in Rio, in Rome. Well, the painting is about that height, a little bit bigger than that, and literally, if you're looking at it, the platform hits you on the head. So the viewer itself, the viewers themselves actually are buried below, and the Christ is going to be buried with you. And so that platform hits you on the head, and the elbow of the paint, I think St. Matthew, I think it was, it is, maybe. So the elbow itself pokes out of the pictorial plane of the painting. So here, evidence throughout history is that at every point of time, artists will push the envelope of visual arts all the time, regardless what the subject matter is or what they have achieved. So in this conversation, I'm not giving a definitive viewpoint in terms of what artists achieve and how it is defined as a way of breaking boundary. What I'm doing is trying to get few paintings together that shows examples of particular artists approach the edges of things where art exists, where interesting things exist. So going from Italy, jumping into Rococo period, in the 1700s, and you have a painter named Fragonard who started painting things that outside of religious subject matter, or even heroic subject matter, like Greek mythology. He started painting things that tickle his mind and tickle his fancy, right? And a little bit eccentric in a lot of ways. And here he creates a painting that's literally talks about eroticism and decadence, right? And in some ways, if you look at the history of painting, most of those kind of paintings were painted for private consumption. Here, he's flaunting it all into the open. And in some ways, challenging the status quo of good taste. So taste all of a sudden become an aspect of boundaries of how we think about things, right? So no longer just a formal academic, formal pursuit, but other things become the perimeters of what we define as art. It's everything that's bad, challenging taste considered high art, or considered avant-garde, or pushing the envelopes. Well, I mean, you know, if you look at Bouguereau a century and a half later, does the same thing. Is essentially just like painted a lot of fairly self-indulgent paintings on the subject matter of female eroticism. And I would say great paintings, probably not the most innovative paintings around. So in a way that how you touch subject matter pushing edges also has to do with being aware of your time, period, and space. I'm going to jump to 20th century, following the same kind of a train of thought, kind of an indulgence of the mind and the hidden, forbidden taboos. This particular painting by a wonderful artist, Lisa Yuskavage. And matter of fact, I was going to kind of like pair her up with another artist. But I thought, you know what, let's talk about what it is and what it's not. And so I don't want to denigrate somebody that's like currently who's doing the same thing, I would say would be on the level of Bouguereau rather than someone like Fragonard. So in this particular painting, Lisa Iskavich essentially created a tableau that's functioning on many different levels. The landscape itself is kind of, in some ways, it's kind of surreal. Harken back to some of the landscape of Salvador Dali. The scale of the things is kind of very strange and obtuse. And also the multi-panel kind of actually reminding of some of the strategies that David in his photograph used yesterday, right? So it's a fairly established strategy, except she approached it in a way that touches upon taboo at the time when she started becoming important artist, that literally people question why and how and what's the point, right? So if you think about taboos in art like that and think about 20th century art, it's full of innovations and pushing envelopes. And in this particular piece here by Marcel Duchamp, literally he puts it in a kind of a exhibition that guaranteed exhibition that they can't refuse. And they have to exhibit it as a piece of art. So he's challenging how do you define something as art by putting in something that's completely, at the time, not art, and created huge controversy, right? And in reality, what he kind of evoked is that almost every art that we make requires some sort of context, right? So later on, American artist named Jasper Jiang, legend has it that he created these two beer bottles as art form, basically as a despite to something that he overheard from an abstract expressionist artist who said, this young generation, they think of everything as art. Someday somebody's going to make this beer can as an art. So that's the fable, right? So Jasper Jiang literally puts another thing in context, is that anything can be art, but can anything be art? And how do you define what art is, right? When you look at 20th century, at the beginning of 20th century, artists were trying to make art that defines the formal experience of visual art that came down from the Renaissance time. And by doing so, they kind of opened various ways of making art. Another thing they did is they delved into the subconscious of who we are, making art that's, surrealism, Dadaism, and, things that we normally we have not thought about until that point. And in the later part of 20th century, artists began to work within the realm of spirituality, not through religion, but through humanism. And here, Joseph Beuys act as almost a shaman, made a performance piece, right? And is that art? And then Anna Miniana, who creates, using her body as a vehicle to connect with Mother Earth and ritualistics of the rituals of nature and art and spirituality. And of course, Louise Bourgeois, who literally nothing is a limit. Everything is on the table when you make art. And just by the fact of making is what defines her as an artist. There's literally, in her entire life, she probably broke more taboos than any other artist because she's lived such a long life. And then you have someone like Kiki Smith, who essentially brought art out of this kind of a very formalist and kind of a male-dominated perspective and brought in narrative, figurative, and self-examination, and opening up all sorts of to all sorts of younger artists, and which I still see in my classrooms, who actually use art as a way to investigate who they are as human beings, and whether it's identity, race, sexuality, art become part of that examination. Whose story is it? Art has always been a conduit, a vehicle for telling stories. Initially, it told the story of Christianity, if you were in Europe, and told the story of Buddha, if you were in Asia, right? So art has always been telling a story, but the recording of art has always been in the hands of the few. In every aspect of culture around the world, if you have 10 people, 3 of them will be artists, if not more. Some of them will be writers, some of them will be musicians, and some of them will be visual artists, right? So in terms of who tells stories and how the stories are told. So this particular piece by Betty Saar kind of like tells a story of the African-American experience and tackle the taboos and the stereotypes. This person, David Hammond, I don't know what the hell he does. He sells snowballs. Is that art? Well, there was a storm. He got out on the street and started selling snowballs. And not long after this piece, a famous art critic literally said, I'll paraphrase here, something like, there isn't any great quality art from African American artists, because if there were, it would have come across me. The problem was, she was never at the corner street of Astral Place, walking by with David Hammond selling Snowball. What is the difference between David Hammond selling Snowball and Joseph Beuys became a shaman? So the story of how we tell it has a lot to do with also define who is being viewed as an artist and who is being viewed not as an artist. And I'm going to end with this particular piece by Kara Walker, who actually it's a generation of artists, not just African American artists, but artists in general, reclaiming history, reclaiming how history is being told and who's telling it, and also forces the storytellers to look, examine, and tell the story that's untold. So I'm going to end it that way with my last piece.
Another big round of applause for Fred Liang. Okay, remember, if you have a question, wait for Hannah or Fatima to come to you with a mic so we can all hear your question. Does anybody have a question for our speakers?
So Brenda, how did MoMA like your poem? Your very candid, powerful, and sexy poem.
Filthy.
And that, what?
The filthy one.
That one. Did they just display the text with the piece? Or how did
It was part of a. It was part of a.
it's
It's on. It was part of a. They asked a bunch of poets to do pieces, and then they did an audio. So there was an audio program
yeah.
that would sort of take you from piece to piece. So I was recorded reading it. So it's kind of even worse, right? Than less this filth is in your ear when you're watching this. But no, it was really important to me to make it as in your face about
Yeah.
sex as possible for MoMA.
because it is.
Yeah.
It is what it is. Another question, if I can. Earlier in your introduction, they said that you were working on an opera. Does that mean you're working on the libretto, or you're working with the actual composing of the music with the composer, or how do you work? How does that work together?
I wrote the libretto, but it's an interesting project because the composer and I are creating it together. So I'm writing the words and the story, and she's writing the music. But we're working on the production because it's complicated. We center artists and creators with disabilities. And so it's got a whole other piece to it. So it's sort of more involved than just writing the book and saying, bye, good luck.
Yeah.
So I'm involved with it.
And this is the first for you, is it?
This is a first for me, yes.
How exciting, right?
Yeah. It's
Thank
finally
you.
going up after 7 years. Jeez, it's taken so. Opera is slower than poetry even.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any further questions?
All right, I'm gonna keep this way away because it's pretty intense. I like Fred. I have to tease this one. Fred's a colleague and a friend, obviously. You know, so you can't talk about your own work without 2-3 hours, but you can go through the history of avant-garde art for the last 600 years in 20 minutes, which I kind of love. I love that connection. Yeah, exactly. So I love, seeing your work on the right as you're going through this, how artists have pushed limits. So I was just curious to, just some ideas that are going through your own head, how you're thinking about your own work and its connection to history as you're making it.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe because I'm in academia, I'm always aware of, whenever I make something, I'm always aware of precedents, and not everything I make, but in terms of the grandeur of things, totality of things, I'm always aware, what came before me, how I fit within that, and also, the idea of boundary. I don't think I was trying to answer it for anybody else, but try to figure out where I am within the context of boundaries, right? And one of the things that's interesting is that as a young artist, I was always chasing the boundary. I was always making sure that I'm at the edge of things. I never want to be in the middle of something. So you kind of always be aware where the boundary is, and you chase that, and you create art to kind of define what that edge is. And regardless whether what you make is interesting or not, because the pursuit of that edge was much more of a task and a game as a younger artist. But now I'm kind of like putting myself within the context of a larger history in terms of how does my work connect to Rococo art, right? And how does it connect to Song Dynasty scroll? And all of that comes into my studio, and I'm completely absorbed and fairly aware of, those kind of history and how that plays into it. I hope that answers it.
I kind of want to ask a follow-up question of you. I loved when you said something so interesting, which was that, is this correct? Great art is not often that innovative.
So innovation is a kind of an interesting thing. I think, well, I can only relate to visual art, is that at any point, any innovation, it's only because of the ethos of the time. Because you can't, I tell my students this all the time. It's like, wow, you're making great stuff. It's really innovative 100 years ago. Because if you're doing the same thing they did 100 years ago, doing it now, it's not an innovation. It might look cool, but it's not, right? So we don't know what the innovation is right now, and I don't think there's ever innovation in I think Duchamp's toilet is probably the biggest leap in the slides that I've shown, but everything else, it's incremental, and it's artists building upon another artist. I mean, everybody talk about Picasso. The only reason Picasso is great because he knows how to steal, right? He can steal better than anybody else, and that actually it's a thing that I think defines how at any point how an artist kind of moves forward. And of course, some people gets called out because they happen to capture the ethos of the time. But at the same time, who's the one that's doing the calling them out, right? So a lot of times you see a lot of great artists out there that exist at any point of human history. They don't get to be hung at the Metropolitan Museum because the people who are looking at it are not the one that's in power. So what innovation is also has to do with who's looking at it and who's defining it as innovation.
Okay, is that better? A lot of the pictures you showed at the beginning were sort of Western great hits that were trying at the time to, copy nature or be about beauty and nature. But the Song Dynasty goal is about essence as opposed to copying of nature, is what I understand. And as you're looking at your own art, I mean, can you comment on that sort of difference, the different goals, one about nature, copying nature, one about trying to find the essence, how that affects your own art?
Sure, I think this is something that, listening to poets, I think they do this instinctively, is that you are deep observer of the things that surrounds you, whether that's observing people, observing light, observing situations or phenomena. And then the difference is that how do you translate the thing that you observe into something that's viewed as an art form, right? And in visual arts, like, I think in terms of European art, the goal was kind of clear in terms of, weights and measurement and scientific, that parallel to scientific discoveries. In Chinese art, it's more about the philosophy. It's always more about relating to the way, relating to philosophy and religion and how you view yourself in the world. You can make a painting, for example, like I'll give, I forgot the artist's name, but a painter from, say, Yuan Dynasty, which is the Mongol period, right? Painters started to painting calligraphies and landscape in a very coarse and dry brushes. It's beautiful. I mean, if you look at it, it's like, wow, amazing. And then you can see that kind of a dry, crusty texture from Impressionism and even from some of the painting by Van Gogh. The difference is this, is that when the Yuan artists started painting these things, they intentionally used the expression of the quality of the mark as a rebellion against the Mongol invaders. And the interesting thing about that is that the art form is so esoteric, and not just in visual arts, but in theater and everything, is so esoteric that Chinese intellectuals recognized it, but foreigners didn't. So the Mongols didn't. So they can display these plays and display these paintings in the courts. Meanwhile, trashing the ruler that's subjecting them, right? So painting has always been a way, not just talking about how certain things are beautiful, but the relationship between who they are and the world surrounding them. So that when you look at a flower on a branch, if there's only one branch, it's literally talking about quality of or existentialism, about who they are. It's a philosophical question. So, and in my work, I think a lot of it has that aspect of it. It might not be directly in connection with subject matter or narrative, but it has, in the background there's that. And interestingly enough, I think one time I had a show in Beijing, and Chinese people nailed it in terms of what I was trying to get to, and the Western critics all talk about the formality of the work. So I hope that.
I've been reading your poetry since knowing I would take your workshop and really enjoying it a lot. But to hear you recite it adds just a whole nother dimension. So I hope you have some places where people can go to hear your work, to some audio recordings.
Oh yeah, I audio recorded Tanya, and it was so strange. It's just such a weird thing to be in this. It was just a strip mall, like warehouse somewhere in Jersey. It's this guy who's like, okay, just go sit over there and put these headphones on and go. And I was like, he's gonna think this is just very strange. But I think the experience of recording an audiobook, I mean, I don't think a single person has bought it, actually. I think my sales for that are 0. My audiobook, but then it's sort of like nice because it's mine. It's my private recording that I made for myself. It's But, you know, reading it, it was sort of, it was really interesting to me, maybe not to anybody else. But, you know, whenever you finish a book, you kind of always feel like, I don't know if this is real. Is that, I don't know about this book. You always feel like, because you can't really remember you have a sinking, strange, elusive feeling that there's some mistake, that you didn't edit something properly, that you left something in that you shouldn't have, that you just somehow erred. You know, you're walking this tightrope and you misstepped. But having to read it, it was like, even if I did make mistakes or misstep, and I'm not talking about typos, I'm talking about like just wrong moves. Even if I did, too late now. It's done. You know, I have to read this. I can't just make it up because it has to be an exact, you know, they don't let you sort of go off script at all. It has to be the exact thing. Otherwise, it's, I don't know, there's some intellectual property thing where I'm not allowed to say anything but what's on the page. So I had to sort of suck it up, buttercup, and like just read what I wrote. And then in doing that, having to suck it up, I was like, okay, I am at peace with it. Because the truth is that the book, this particular book, the last part, it's called Tanya, and it really is just so Tanya was my first year in college roommate. We were very, very, very close. Like, you know, that kind of close that there's a epigraph, Virginia Woolf says, the kind of closeness that can only really happen between two women just grown. So it's a sort of young woman best friend thing that, of course, exploded magnificently and horribly. I haven't seen her in over 30 years. And so I titled it, it's not really about her, I just want her to find me. So the audiobook was sort of a way that I was actually, with my voice, sort of calling her into the ether. You know, not that she was, and she hasn't, by the way, she hasn't. But the experience of making my own voice go through the whole book. As a writer, I am a creative artist, but in the reading of it, I was an interpretive artist, thereby sort of marrying the two things that I was sort of wrestling with at the very end of that poem, which ends the book. So thanks for that question, because it was a very fond memory. It was just sort of like, I imagine how it is if you are one of those people who goes into space and then you're just out there. You know how there's always in the movies, there's like that situation where there's like some kind of problem on the shuttle or the ship, so you have to go out there in space all by yourself, just being held by a, you know, just the line and your spacesuit, and you have to go out there with your dumb tool that's obviously gonna fly away because and you have to fix something, but then there's that sound. I felt like that was as close as I'm gonna ever get to that experience. So.
Wow. Whoa. Well, I have a related question to, you have multiple books now, and I wonder when you assemble your poems for a book, do they all come from the time frame of your last book, or do they come from the collection of poems that you've accrued over decades? I mean, so.
In the writing of it?
Yeah, the writing.
Yeah, I just write wherever I am. The Octopus Museum, which came out in 2019, is all completely set in a dystopian scenario where we have no rights because octopuses have come on land and taken over humankind. Because that's where I was then. And then this one is much more of a look back and looking at influences and mentors, the things that inspire, the things that shaped. So, yeah, it's interesting to look back. It's almost like, does anyone like journal keep and then have like a big wall of journals? You know, like a just sort of shelf of all your journals, and you're like, what are those? Are those books? Is it just scribbles? Scrap paper? I sort of feel like, in a way, looking at a shelf of my books, it just sort of feels like, yeah, almost like yearbooks from high school or journals. Like that's what I cared about at the time. But they totally talk to each other because it's not like I am not the person who wrote the earlier books. I carry her around as much as I don't like to, and she's, you know, too heavy.
And one last question, if I may, and then I'll hand over this Mike. How do you choose what poems to read? Like tonight, how did you choose? Like, is it just feeling the audience somehow, or is it just what you're in the mood for?
I always choose the wrong thing to read. I don't know what it is. I always choose the wrong thing. Today, I let guide I wanted to embrace the spirit and the feeling of Provincetown, because I just there's such a it's magical here, as you know, and I think it's that interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary energy that's flowing that makes poets and visual artists and fiction writers and nonfiction writers all be in the same room and in conversation about making. So today I leaned heavily on pieces that were about making and sort of crossing genres of art. And querying, since I'm teaching and since I have these wonderful students like you, Nina, it made me think every single book, especially this one, is a learning process. I don't know how to write a poem before I write it, because it's new. Yes, there's things I've learned and I know how to do it, but sometimes what happens is that I use my old bag of tricks too often, and I sort of rely on something I already know how to do, because I think that's going to make it better. And so continually, in order to avoid that, have to sort of learn anew, try new things that are different from my usual ways. So I leaned on picking poems like that were about that process. And I also like to shout out to, I like to name drop visual artists in my poems, especially in a place like this, because people often know them. Sometimes someone's, I know that person. In fact, just the other day, someone's like, I know Jessica Rankin. It's a small world, and I like to call attention to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fred, at the beginning of your presentation and your slides, you started with the portrait of Van Gogh juxtaposed next to Bob Ross. Bob Ross, whose work is kind of empty, soulless, not much there. That's the way I've always looked at it. And then you, in your history of art, you brought up Fragonard, which is kind of fanciful, empty, not a soul there either. It made me rethink Bob Ross and the idea of pushing the envelope. You think maybe is Bob Ross, whether he knows it or not, pushing the envelope about what we think about art?
Actually, that's a very good observation, because if you think about, like, prior to 20th century, the envelope of art, pushing envelope of art is always coming inside of what's considered mainstream high art, right? But if you move into 20th century, it's not that way, right? You have, Rousseau, who actually started painting very late, and it's considered, one of the masters of that period, right? And then you jump even forward. I mean, this is where James is going to say, how do you jump 100 years like that? So you jump forward almost 100 years, and then you get to 1980s, early 80s. You have Keith Haring, right? And Keith Haring literally is someone that brought street art into mainstream, and before that, it was not considered as serious art, right? And then if you think about Fragonard, and then think about Marilyn Minter, I mean, I don't think there's that far of a fetch to say they're kind of similar tree, kind of indulgence and sensuality and all of that, right? So the question of, like, Bob Ross, I thought it might be clear to people, but if you look at hard enough, it's like, like, where does that edge exist, right? And what I think is the beauty about, I can only say about visual art, is that some artists gonna find that edge and really makes it very interesting. And there are artists that actually have done it even within their career, such as Philip Guston, right? You look at, he did he had literally had 3 careers as a muralist, muralist, and then as a abstract expressionist, right? And then at the end, he does these clunky, weird figurative painting that look like, he never learned how to paint before. And literally, his artist friend, William DeConey, disowned him. So what he did...
Because he didn't like his art, his friend disowned him?
Yes.
He said, your art's going in a bad direction, I don't like you anymore?
I think it's coined as the bad art. Right. DeConey never talked to him after that. So in a way that Guston pushed it from even within the realm of mainstream art, but coming from outside. And then literally you open up Basquiat, Keith Haring, and people like that, right? Well, Warhol was behind the tree of, like Rosenquist and even Jasper Johns. But Warhol was also always considered as a mainstream artist. Keith Haring was not. Keith Haring, was only being viewed as mainstream art when there's a whole push from mainstream art push toward street art, right? So where that edge is, it's not a fixed point of view. So Fragonard could be as innovative and edgy at one period, but Bouguereau isn't. They were painting pretty much the same kind of crap, right? It's for wealthy aristocrats, who want all these like beautiful paintings of women in their own space, right? But somehow Fragonard kind of broke the mold of what came before him, and Bouguereau just cashing in. I think someone once wrote about Bouguereau that, he can't afford to go to the bathroom because he was losing money because he was so popular, right? So, just within the subject matter, it's not guaranteed that's a innovative thing. If I was to do, street art and painting on people's body right now, okay, sure, no big deal, right? So it does have something to do with what Duchamp did. It's the context, right? So I think that's why Duchamp probably, of all the artists out there, is probably the most innovative artist. At least the one I have shown. There are probably other ones, but yeah, without Duchamp, you wouldn't get Jasper Johns. You wouldn't get Joseph Beuys, and and so on and so on, right?
Okay, let's have another round of applause, please, for Brenda Shaughnessy and Fred Liang. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Remember to check out the books. Brenda will be signing books at the back. Check out the bookstore and the exhibition, and come back tomorrow for student night. Have a great evening. Thank you.